Hello, we're going today about writing to convince or persuade for our researched argument, which for most of us is Essay 3. This is part 1. And so you'll hear maybe a few things you've heard before, but we're going to start from the beginning and make sure that you understand everything from this. So the first part is understanding our purpose and what it means to write an argument essay. In this, it means that we are making a claim that some people would disagree with, and we're supporting it with reasons and evidence, not just opinion, not just our personal beliefs. And making a claim means that there are other people who claim something different. We're not informing, we're not really evaluating, even though those things may be a part of it. An effective argument makes a well-supported, well-considered, means you've thought about it, point about an issue. And it would be a controversial issue, an issue that maybe it's a problem that needs to be solved, or maybe it's something new and we're not sure in society whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. So there's some debate about it. And an effective argument means it's going to be able to convince people, will have good support. And we're going to be taking a look at what that means in the course of this slideshow and the next, and over the weeks that we spend on this assignment. We may want them to be convinced, that means simply agree with us. We change their mind. In some cases, we actually ask people to take action, and that's the semantic or word difference between convincing or persuading. If we inspire them to, or want them to do some action, vote or accept a policy. In short, a policy purpose is to take a position on an issue, a controversial one, and convince or persuade readers. This is part of the advantage of a society in which we have a democracy, a democratic form of government where we decide and debate things together. When you're accused of a crime or a violation, there is a debate between the plaintiffs and the defendants, and they have to present evidence and present a case. It's not just assumed. You're assumed innocent until proven guilty. So for us, we're writing academic arguments. We're not writing necessarily for a courtroom, right? We're not having personal debates with people in our family, which can take on a whole different type of flavor. For an academic argument, there's specific things that are expected, and these are going to be very similar to your profession, although not exactly the same. So we've got to learn effective strategies. Some of those would be, first of all, researching the topic. That's an expectation at the academic level. And if you think about it on a professional level, okay, they may not go to a database and find their articles, but we want them to research the issue. I'm thinking medically. We want our doctor or healthcare professionals to do the right research for the types of medications or the diagnostic tests that need to be done to have our best care, to diagnose the sickness that we may have and to treat it properly. We don't want it just based off, even though they're qualified to give an expert opinion, they're going to need to run some tests to verify that. In our academic world, we go to databases and other reliable sources to find out information that we need. So we have to use reliable sources for evidence, and of course, you're going to be looking for the ones that support your position after you've thoroughly understood your topic. The second strategy is using logic and reasoning to explain and support your view. We're not learning how to be manipulative of others or put pressure on them or to scare them into agreeing with you. That's not considered ethical. If that's the only reason you have. If logically it is something we need to be aware of and be concerned about, then that's appropriate. We also expect you to address the other side, people's objections and concerns. There's a reason why there's two sides to this issue, and that means there's some legitimate concerns or objections from the other point of view, and you're going to get the most headway with them if you at least address those and present a reasonable presentation that acknowledges that you may not agree, you may not see it the same way, obviously you don't, but you have addressed those objections. And then you really have to appeal to the reader. If you don't appeal to the reader, then they're not going to listen, much less be convinced. So you have to really think about, why should the reader care or value the issue the way you do? It's a very different idea than just expressing your opinion and saying why you believe what you believe. Your task is to convince the reader, change their mind, and you have to appeal to them. We've talked about this in class before, and but I just want to review real quickly that Aristotle, when he observed this type of debate and conversation way back during Greek democracy, he noticed that there were three kinds of basic appeals: the logos, the logic, which is the core for academic arguments, and it should be for the professional as well. But very important is ethos, which is the ethics, the character, the reliability of either the person, right, that you're getting this from. In our case, we don't know the person, so we have to maybe look them up, but we're getting that information because they published it to a journal and it was put out on a database. We found their article, or they wrote a book, or they published it to a website or something, and we have to check. And we learned in Essay 2 how to apply the CRAP and origin criteria to determine whether it was reliable and credible and trustworthy. We look at their credentials to see if their opinions are expert and we should listen to them. And then we look at the overall presentation, the format, the bias, things like that. And third, pathos. It's the personal side. It's emotional. We are emotional beings. In terms of reliability, it's the least because our emotions change. We've all had times when we felt upset or angry about something, and then once we get all the logos, the facts, our emotions sometimes change, right? Or sometimes we don't really care until we get the facts, and then we find out, oh my word, I didn't know that, and now I'm, upset. So they're tied together. It is heavily used by advertisers, and they're not always the most credible, not always the least biased, right? And they don't always have all the facts. So we have to be careful in our analysis of people's use of appeals on us, and also be ethical about how we use appeals on others. The way I structure it is that the logos is the core. Okay, that's the biggest piece, but the facts aren't, if they're not reliable from good, reliable sources, they could be wrong. They may not actually be facts. Just because someone says 2,000 people did such and such, how do we know that's true? Just because someone says this is the way it is, how do we know? So we have to use the foundation. If it's it's like a recipe. If you don't have the right ingredients, right? If they're spoiled, if the ingredients are out of date, if the milk is spoiled, if the baking powder is expired, the recipe isn't going to work. It's not going to work. And the logos, the core, is the actual putting it together, the process of it, like a cake, and then the pathos is the icing on the cake, right? And this is particularly for academic arguments because we're going to preference the ethos and the logos. Effective argument essays have these things. If we're looking deeper at the strategies, writers must carefully consider the reader's needs, the reader's interests, their backgrounds, and how much they know. So audience analysis is important. You've got to look outside yourself. A tendency sometimes as a writer, I'm expressing myself. If you're going to be an effective argument maker, if you're going to be an effective persuader, if you want people to listen to your perspective, you're going to have to think about what they need and what they know and what you need to provide for them. So not only do you, the writer, have to be knowledgeable, right, about the issue, you also have to be knowledgeable about those differing viewpoints. And that's why part of our assignment is to have 2 viewpoint articles, one that you probably agree with, right, but also the other side of the issue. If you're going to be effective, you got to know where people are coming from. If they disagree with you, what are they thinking and why do they think that? That's how you'll figure out how to go about being strategic in convincing them. So your process, okay, so that's kind of an overview, and then now we're going to get into what you would do. First of all, obviously you have to decide on your topic, your issue, a relevant and important issue, and we talk about that in class, and talk about how for us in our context of learning, we go to the opposing viewpoints database, to find those because they're all housed together. And then on that issue, you decide what you're for or against. There's several words here. You make a claim that's specific, like we should do this or we should not do this, or this policy proposal is good or it's bad. It's kind of like some samples that we might use. You might be for more gun control, or you might be against more gun control, that what we have already is sufficient. You may think that illegal immigration is good for the economy, or you may think your claim might be that it's bad for the economy, and you'll create a thesis that states your position. But before you really get into that completely, you've got to really understand your issue. You've got to brainstorm what you know, but you always are going to have to research. These issues, none of us are already experts on it. We've heard things, we may have read things, but we haven't deeply researched it, more than likely. Okay, so we have to do that for this. That's what we've been doing. Along the way, we're going to develop, you've got to have reasons. Okay, and your reason can't just be because, well, that's just what I think, right? Or that's just my opinion. So here's a list, and you really need to write these down. I don't think these are spelled out quite as well in the current edition of our chapters we have. And as you do the assignment where you do a report on supporting articles, you're really going to need to be looking for these. All right, anytime you propose a claim for or against something, these are some of the natural things we consider. First of all, what is it going to cost? Solutions are rarely free. They cost us something. People who are for or against something, soda tax. Well, it's going to cost something if we do a soda tax. If you build a border wall, if you provide universal health care, if you enact more regulations on gun control, it's going to cost something. And you have to kind of make sure you address that. Sometimes you have to say that it offsets, like, yes, it's going to cost money, but it's going to save lives, right? The time that I am right now recording this, we're, as a country and the world, dealing with the coronavirus. It costs money to fight this particular battle, and it's not something we already had a budget for, per se. It'll cost money, but it's going to cost lives, and so you have to decide, and where is it best suited to go. So you've got to consider that. People want to know, how much is it going to cost, and then is it worth it? Which is the next one, the benefit. What are we gaining from this? Add the word harms, because sometimes that's the flip side. A benefit is good, right? That's something I get good out of whatever this is you're proposing. But some things, there are harms, and you might be arguing that something's bad. This will harm us in some way. This might have one benefit, and often if it's a controversial issue, that's because it's not one-sided. There's pros and cons, right? There's benefits and maybe some downsides. The shortage of ventilators right now, getting some ventilators is great, but they're saying right now they don't have enough for everybody. That's terrible. Or that we don't have enough masks, and of course it's going to cost for the healthcare people, it's going to cost money. The benefit, though, is worth it, right? And I don't know of any harm, but there's just all these issues that have come up, and people trying to decide what's the best thing to do and how do we go about doing it and who should do it and when. But some issues, there are clear risks. We know with any kind of medication, you've seen the ads, there are side effects, right? That the benefit of helping lower your blood pressure, there might be the side effect of I don't know, something else, right? Kidney failure or something, and you have to weigh those out. And that leads us to alternatives and trade-offs. So what are the options? Sometimes there aren't. This is the what they call the lesser of two evils, or there's no option that's completely risk-free, but of the alternatives that we have, this is the best one. And here's the trade-off. We have to put up with, right now we're putting up with having to stay home, right? The trade-off is that we have to stay home, quarantine ourselves, but the trade-off is that we'll flatten the curve and the virus will die out instead of escalate. So no one wants to stay home, on purpose every day, or lose their job. People are losing their jobs. Businesses are shutting down, but it's a trade-off, right? It's costing us something, but the benefit is, not getting sick with this thing or dying or giving it to people that we love that may suffer. Okay, and that leads us to values and beliefs. It's not that you don't have those, but you want to make sure when you're using them, you use the ones that you believe your audience has in common with you. You want to appeal to those common values and beliefs, okay? Not just, so you have to sift through your personal ones and decide which ones would be ones that you could appeal to. Real quick, parallels. Parallels are like analogies. They're when you look for similar cases. You say, we should do this because over here they did that. Right now they're looking around the world and going, okay, where is the coronavirus getting worse and what did they not do? Or where is it not getting worse? What are they doing that's different? How can we, copy them if it's working out? For soda tax, did they use that in Sweden? Did that reduce obesity? They tried it in New York City. Did that work? Did it work there? And so you use parallels or for similar cases. Personal experience can be used. You can't build your entire argument essay in an academic setting around personal experience because your truth and your circumstance may not be true for everybody, but it certainly is a valid support and a reason why you would have a claim. Historical context is similar to parallels, but it goes into the past. Parallels are closer to the present, like what's going on around us right now or within the recent, past, last year or the year before, something fairly contemporary. Historical context is looking further into the past. Soda taxes have been considered similar to a sin, S-I-N, syntax, like cigarettes and alcohol, because they look back and argue, well, prohibition didn't work. That's when they made it illegal. So instead of making sodas illegal, because that didn't work in the past, let's just tax them. That's what they ended up doing with alcohol. So it's when you look for similarities from things that happened in the past. All right, so that means you've got to research. You are using reliable sources, you're collecting evidence. What kind of things are you looking for? Well, at the top of the list, you're looking for what we call textual evidence, things that were actually written in your articles. So when you use, and you need to be selective about this, if you use a word-for-word quote, which should be very minimal, no more than 10% total for your whole paper should be word for word. But sometimes someone says something, then you want to use exactly how they said it, just a sentence or something. Then you'd use a quote. Sometimes you want to share what they said, but you were limited on quotes, so you paraphrase it, you reword it. That's when you take a sentence or two and you change it into another sentence or two, but you're paraphrasing it. Your words, not theirs. Okay, it's really important. You still have to say where it came from, no matter what. We'll talk about citing in another video. Summaries are shortened versions of something larger. Sometimes you read a whole article and you just sort of tell us the gist of it. You don't paraphrase because you're not telling us word for word your own words, but you're saying this article overall, advocated for this, said it was a good idea because, and you just sort of gave an overview. And that's another good way to represent your research, especially if you have a lot of it. Numbers, data, statistics, of course. Those two things right there can be probably your top two, but other types that count. Sometimes a chart or graph is very good demonstration of something you're trying to get a point you're trying to get across. If you had the time, and right now we're limited, anyway, because of the quarantines at home, info from interviews, if you actually interviewed an expert, if you had access to somebody, did a survey, those are types of evidence. Expert opinion, you might get to that through your articles where you have someone with high credentials who's saying this is my expert opinion, and you borrow from them. And then again, personal experience. So those are different types of evidence to support the reasons that you have. All right, so the basic criteria for evidence, and we're not talking about the CRAP here, that's for the sources. But when we actually look at what you're pulling from the sources, once you've determined that the sources are reliable, okay, first of all, obviously whatever you're using needs to be relevant, right? It needs to support your thesis. It needs to actually support it and go with it. It needs to be timely, not out of date. And it goes without saying, it should go without saying, but we'll say it again, it has to be from a reliable, academic level, credible source, okay? Number two, representative or typical, right? These would not be controversial if there were not exceptions. You want to make sure that you're using the example that's typical, and that if you're using yourself as an example, that you have justified that that's pretty typical. It's not the random thing or the exception, okay? Because it's hard to find anything that's 100% all the time, every time. If it were that, we would have no controversy, okay? You're also making sure that you, although you are only arguing from one side, that you do include, somewhere in your paper, we'll talk about where when we talk about outlines, that you acknowledge the other side, that there are things that happen that are outside of what you're saying. For example, there might be times when illegal immigrants do things that are harmful to the economy, but you're saying overall they're better for the economy, right? Or vice versa. There might be times when the soda tax works, and sometimes when it may not work for everybody, right? So you have to acknowledge some of that, even though you may still argue that the soda tax is the best thing to do, or the border wall, or whatever it is, right? Whatever your issue is, or more gun control or less gun control. You may have to acknowledge that gun control may not stop every mass shooting, because people go around all the, get it through the black market or something. But that's what we mean there. Make sure that you include the fact that there are some exceptions, but make sure you're arguing for your side from not the exceptions, okay? All right, sufficient. This is a big question, and I don't have an exact number. How much do you need? How much evidence? And I can tell you that enough is always more than one, okay? I mean, just one piece is not enough to convince somebody who's not already made up their mind, agree with you, okay? We have our minimum number of sources you have to use, and the basic overall principle is this. The more skeptical your audience, the more controversial the topic, the more evidence you need. Remember, you're not just telling what's enough for you because you've already made up your mind. You're trying to convince somebody else. So if in a courtroom you're trying to win, you're trying to put out all the evidence you can to guarantee that the jury is going to come back with the verdict that you desire, whether that's guilty or not guilty, right? You're not just going to put in the minimum. You're not just going to throw out one or two things that you think will work. You're going to want to stack that case up with as much hard-hitting evidence as possible. And so you got to take that approach too when you're trying to persuade. How to identify that evidence to support your reasons. This is going to go into, we're going to be doing a worksheet on this. That assignment's coming up pretty soon. You should hear me in a live session talk about that. But listing the reasons that you are going to use to support your claim, and every reason that you've come up with, make sure you have evidence to support it and list it there, and then you can kind of see where you might have some gaps, because as you go through your articles, you might think you have enough, and then when you start listing your reasons, you might find out that, maybe I don't have as much support for that reason. And so you have to decide whether you're gonna, that's a really important reason, then you may have to go search for some more evidence to support it. Or you might go, well, I've got enough reasons. This one, I can drop that reason, because we're only trying to develop really the most 3. Here's just a real quick example. Let's say the claim is League of Legends, which is a video game kind of group, offers a better or superior approach to online gaming. So the first reason is they have a better business model, and that's the benefit, right? That's a benefit reason. And they're going to have some evidence that they get of that from their community forum website, where people who've experienced World of Warcraft and compared it to League of Legends have actually wrote in and said, oh, I really like it, this is the good things about it, da-da-da, and they'll maybe quote them or summarize them or paraphrase them. And they take some notes there that World of Warcraft is the subscription model rather than the business model, and the selling power is a problem. So that's just a little kind of summary of how you have a reason, you have your claim, this is what you're for or against. You have a reason. One of the reasons is that the business model is better than the subscription model. Where did you find some evidence for that? Okay. Last part, we're getting near the end here. Identify and consider opposing claims. The critical part of developing your argument is identifying them. First of all, you have to build your own case, and that's what we've been talking about mostly, building your own case. But you have to kind of address at least the opposing claims. You're not offering as an either or. You definitely have a claim. You definitely have a certain point of view on this, but you have to say, okay, look, you might be thinking this way, and here's maybe why, but right, here's why you should change your mind, basically. Right? It's important to readers that you respectfully acknowledge their reasonable objections and their differing points of view. And think about it. Put yourself in their shoes. If someone is trying to convince you of something and they won't listen to you, if you're like, but what about, and they ignore you, you're going to feel like, they really don't know where I'm coming from. They don't understand, and you're not going to be convinced. Well, your readers don't have that chance to ask a live question because this is in a written format, and so you have to go ahead and do the listening beforehand. and include that a little bit there. So what you do is you don't try to address everything. It's not what your paper's mostly about, but you want to identify the most compelling opposing arguments and ask yourself, hey, how do my reasons and evidence match up? If you're the attorney, if you were like an attorney, you would want to know what's the best evidence and reasons that the defense is giving for not guilty, right? And I'm saying they are. Is it their alibi? Right? Are they saying they couldn't, so-and-so couldn't have done it because they have this alibi, or something else? Well, am I addressing that alibi? Am I, do I have evidence that's more compelling than that alibi evidence? And that's what we mean there, and you want to make sure you can address it. All right. Logical fallacies happen. We will make sure that we recognize them so that we don't fall prey and be fooled, and we also make sure that we don't use them ourselves. So here's a few. A red herring. Remember we are focusing on logic. So when we put together reasoning, we have to make sure that it really actually does make sense. A red herring is a fish, and so it's like, what does that have to do with anything? Exactly. That's what it is. It's when someone throws something irrelevant or into the mix just to distract you. It would be like saying, well, maybe you're arguing the alibi, and someone says, but they've been such a good employee, all these years, and you're like, well, what does that have to do with anything? Or maybe they just throw something else out and say, well, you're just saying that because you don't like my client because they have a ponytail or whatever, and it's just totally irrelevant. It's usually meant to hit a hot button, like to try to, someone can hit your buttons and you kind of go off. A lot of times it does that. It's kind of a distracting kind of thing. Another one is ad hominem. You don't have to remember all the names. You just kind of have to know what these things are. Ad hominem attacks. Some of these are based on some Latin words. Discredit an idea by attacking a person associated with it. And that's like, okay, we're against the soda tax because somebody so-and-so that's for it ended up in jail. They supported the soda tax. Well, doesn't mean the idea wasn't good. I mean, that's unfortunate that someone who thought it was a good idea has done some bad things, but that still doesn't mean the idea itself is not good. But it has that effect. Sometimes we're like, oh no, I can't be for that idea because it'd be like supporting that bad person, and it's not really true. The next one, sweeping, hasty generalizations. We're all guilty of this sometimes. We just, without researching, getting all the story, all the information, we just quickly make a judgment, or we come to a conclusion too quickly. And in this, that you can't be guilty of this, right? We're going to have weeks to research. You've got to go and do that and get all the information. And then last on this slideshow here, citing inappropriate authorities. Advertisements will use celebrity endorsements. That's fine, they can. But we're not in that zone. We're in academic. So we don't want to be just citing somebody because we like them and they're persuasive. I use the example back in a while, Tiger Woods, great golfer. He's an expert when it comes to golf, but he would do Gillette shaving cream commercials. Why? Because at the time he was popular, but he's not more of an expert than anybody else. When he became unpopular, they pulled him off the ad, right? We just have to make sure we're citing the appropriate authorities. Okay, well, I managed to keep this just under 30 minutes, which was my goal, and make sure that you got this first part and see what we were doing, and then come back when it's assigned to watch the next one.